Hey everyone, Couch Tomato here. I just want to talk a little bit about some Catan Cities and Nights strategies and some key concepts that are unique to this expansion. So starting with the first point, something you might see often in games is one player robbing another, and the player says, "Why are you robbing me? So-and-so has more points." Or in other situations, you may get robbed and have the most points, but clearly someone else is in a better position and they're not getting robbed. And so that's point number one, is this whole concept of points in Cities and Nights and why they really don't matter, and how you really should be measuring a player's worth. Second point is somewhat actually related, and it's talking about leaders and how we deal with them. And so in Cities and Nights, we have a lot of tools at our disposal, much more than the base game. We have more control over knights for robbing. We also have a lot of cards that attack players. And so when you use these cards and knights to hurt other people, it affects everyone's game. And knowing who to target is actually a very, very big part of the game. And if you don't do that right, you may upset some people. So how do you identify who you should be targeting? And going back to the first point, that's probably not the person with the most points. And so before I begin, I'm just going to make the assumption that everyone here knows the rules for Catan Cities and Nights. And I'm just going to expand on certain aspects of the rules over here. Most notably, I really want to bring to attention progress cards. And progress cards are something that are really the heart and soul of Cities and Nights. They really change the game a lot, and if you think about it, each progress card, or at least most progress cards, they have certain value in terms of certain resources, right? So for example, an engineer, the green engineer card, you could build a city wall for free. Isn't that just 2 bricks for free? Medicine, you can upgrade one of your settlements into a city for 2 ore and 1 grain. Well, that's basically like having an ore and grain as part of this card, because that's the discount. And in irrigation, this could be worth anything from 0 up to 8 wheat. And some cards have a lot of these values, so for example, mining is also 0 to 6. Road building, this is 2 wood and 2 bricks. Let me skip over the blue cards for a bit. Yellow cards are particularly nasty. So for example, the monopolies. If you play it right, so for example, each player has to give you 2 types of that resource if they have them. If you do a full strength monopoly and take, for example, 2 wheat from every player, that's not only 6 wheat you're gaining from everyone, that's 2 wheat that each player is losing. So that's a huge shift in resources, and that can't be understated enough. Same goes for trade monopoly. And then blue cards, they just typically make players lose cards. So for example, Saboteur, discard half the cards. Deserter is kind of similar to Resource Monopoly. You gain a knight and they lose a knight. So if you think about a knight as a sheep, ore, and then possibly wheat if it's activated. If it's level 2, then that's 2 sheep, 2 ore, and then plus or minus a wheat. That's that value that you're gaining, and then value that your opponent is losing. And so you see that in general, each of these cards, they have values that could be up to like 8 cards, or in the case of Resource Monopoly, that's plus 8 and then minus 8 for everyone else, and that's like a 16 card swing. These are very, very powerful cards. And in combination with each other, they could be worth a lot more than your simple hand of resources and commodities. And for this reason, this is why going up the progress track is so important. And the thing about the progress track, and by the progress track I mean your city improvements, so going from level 1 to level 5 of the red, blue, and yellow tracks, these tracks basically give you income in the form of progress cards, and progress cards translate to a lot of resources gained and lost by other players. So that brings me to my next point, which is this concept of tall and wide. And tall and wide is a thing mainly from turn-based strategy games, the most famous being Civilization. So here's a screenshot from that game. For those who are not familiar with Civilization, you build cities, you build an empire and conquer the world. But then you could also choose if you want to go tall and wide. So wide means you just spread everywhere like Russia in real life. But tall means you just focus everything into your few cities and have your cities pump out so many resources. And so in this screenshot here, we're just looking at a city, Paris. And you have the ability to build buildings, and these buildings can power up your city to do more. It's basically like the city improvements in Cities and Knights, so they let you do more. And a player who grows tall, the thing about them is that as they're building these improvements, they don't get any points. And that's a point that I can't stress enough. So if you think about the base game, typically most of your points are in the form of your settlements and cities, and those immediately translate to your engine strength, right? Because the more settlements and cities you have, the more resources you get, typically. Of course, this kind of varies depending on the numbers that are associated with those cities, but in general, they reflect the strength of your economy. In Cities and Knights, though, when you level up in the progress track, you don't get points. You just slowly get to build more income and progress cards. And so there's all this hidden value in this progress card engine that's not really being reflected in the player's score. And so that brings me to the first major point. You can't really judge a player's position by their points. You have to really look at the aggregate of everything, and that includes their progress on the progress track that allows them to do things that aren't reflected in their points. So for example, you could look at someone who has 5 points, so like 2 cities and 1 settlement, and another one who also has 5 points, like maybe 3 settlements and 1 city, and they both have the same number of points, but the first player may have level 3 on each of the tracks, which includes the all-powerful aqueduct, while the second player might have level 0 to level 1 in each track. So obviously the first player has a lot more they can do. So now that we've discussed this more in detail, let's go back and talk about how do we determine who the actual leader is. And for that, I'm going to bring up my guide over here. Let me go down to this part. So the leader in Cities and Knights is really not the person who has the most points, it's the person who has the biggest chance of winning. And measuring someone's odds of winning is not an easy thing to calculate, but there are multiple factors you can take into account, and I have them listed here. So in somewhat of an order of priority, here are the main things. So aqueduct is a big thing, because an aqueduct lets you get resources every turn where a 7th doesn't roll. If someone gets aqueduct early, they basically have exponential growth, and that's very, very hard to stop. Number 2 is the development tree, and that's basically your progress card engine. And this is what I was just talking about for the beginning part of this video. This is extremely important because progress cards are in some sense even more important than your own hand. But going back to your own hand, that is also important. Then that's your basic income. That's point number 3 over here. And this reflects your resource and commodity engine. It is possible to win the game with a very poor progress card engine if you build wide. You just have so much income that you're able to do so much with it. It's much rarer in Cities and Knights, and usually you need to supplement that with some progress cards. But this is something that you still have to take into consideration. So someone with a city on a 5, 6, 9 or very high value hexes, that's also important to look at. Number 4 is taking a look at their strategy in more detail. So for example, does that player have ports? And do they have an engine that kind of supports a lot of mobility? So for example, maybe someone has a brick port and they have a bunch of cities on bricks. They might not have a lot of numbers, they might not even have a city on a forest or anything that produces paper, but they can just trade to get whatever they want. And so that's something you also have to pay a lot of attention to. Next is expansion potential. So where can they build on the board? How many cities do they have left? While this is super important in base, it's not as important in Cities and Knights, but it's something to keep in mind towards the mid to end game. And then finally, Knights. So not only do Knights give you Defender of Catan if you have a lot of them, but if you have a strong Knight network, you're hard to touch and rob from. And if you do get control of the robber, then you could do a whole bunch of chain robberies, and that's a form of income that is not reflected in your progress cards or in your cities and settlements. There's no exact mathematical formula to figure out who is the best player in the league, and most of that just comes down to practice and experience. But if you kind of weigh it in somewhat in this order, you get a good idea of who has the best odds of winning. And now my way of thinking is a little bit nuanced than that. So I tend to break the game into certain parts. So So I have this black line here, just pretend that's a points timeline. And where the best player is in terms of number of points kind of breaks down the stage of game. So for example, let's say over here, I think when someone reaches around 7 points, that separates the mid game from the late game, or end game. I'll call it end game actually. And then something like 4 points is the divider between the early and the mid game. And so there's a different type of nuance for each part, because in each stage of the game, your way of calculating the odds changes significantly. So in the end game, it's actually very concrete. At the point where someone has around 7 points, you should start thinking about win conditions. It's all about win conditions in the end game. So I'm just going to use this game as an example for what I think about in the early, mid, and late game. So right now it's in the early game because the invasion just happened not so long ago. Green and purple have lost their cities, just leaving red and black in strong positions. Both of them already have pretty decent progression of the yellow track, black more than red. And if we look at their positions on the board, both of them are pretty well poised to go up that track. Whereas if we look at their other settlements, black has access to ore and wood. Once he gets a city there, that'll be great. And actually, same thing with red. Red has a lot of ore, but not so much wood. And so at this point of the game, it's pretty clear who I'm gonna block. It's just a matter of gambling, and at this point, I'm gonna gamble that red or black has the best chance of winning. And ideally, if I could block both of them here, I will. And I'm just gonna steal for black for now, because he has, I think he has a slightly better city, or he has a better chance of going up the green track, and they're gonna race each other for the blues down the line. But yeah, the main point for this early game is that it's just kind of guessing where they're gonna go based on their current positions, and we can see here that both red and black have a very good start, with red being better in ore and black being a little bit better on wood. So we'll see how it plays out. So here we are in the mid game now, as two people are above 4 points, red and purple. Who would you judge as the leader? Well, in this case, in the mid game, it's a little more complicated than the early game or the late game. It's a little bit of guessing, and it's a little bit more of thinking about how they're gonna win. So in this case, we just kind of look at each player case by case. So green is an easy one. Green doesn't have a city. They don't have much progress in the development track over here, and foreseeably they'll probably be not in the running for a very long time, barring some extreme circumstances. Alright, so actually now I'm forced to choose right now, and let's see, here I'll go with blocking red, which I'll explain shortly. I'm just gonna strip black of his knight real quick. Okay, so between red and black, it's a little more tricky. These are again very strong players, and how it's panned out is that red now already got Aqueduct, which makes him a strong player, and no one else is even close. So he pretty much has that green metro locked in. So that's 2 more points for him. He has 2 cities, whereas black only has 1. Black already has a yellow metro, so 2 of his points are kind of non-producing points, whereas most of red's are in production because of his 2 cities. Although he does have 1 merchant, but the merchant helps a lot as well. So overall, I would judge red to be the biggest threat right now, and that's usually how I do it. As for purple, which is me in this case, so I have 2 cities and 1 settlement, I'm very low on the progress track because I lost my city originally, but I'm climbing back up. So as you can see, I already got both cities and have city walls on both of them. And I will hopefully try to make a run on the blue metro, although red will probably lock that down way before me. So let's see where it goes from here. Hopefully with this setup, I'm going to get a lot of knights because I have ore wheat sheep, and so I'll be able to secure my area and then steal a lot of cards from everyone else. So that's the game plan, but basically that's the explanation of why I would target red, but then in the meantime, black suddenly got a bunch of points. Let's see, where did he get that from? I think he just got... so black just built the city and then took the merchant. So we'll see. I think they're still pretty close, even though red doesn't have as many points. He has a lot of ways to get points easily. But then, and again, black also has a pretty good setup with overall pretty good distribution of resources. But red also has aqueduct, so it's still up in the air, and you can make an argument for any of them. Alright, so now it's basically in the late game, and things that look in the late game are your win conditions. So how can each of these players win, and whoever has the easiest way to achieve their win condition is who I consider the biggest threat. So and all you have to do is just go by player. So green we're gonna skip for now because he kind of doesn't really have a win condition. Whereas red's interesting. He's well developed on all the tracks. Black already has yellow metro, but red could theoretically easily take it from him because he has city on a 6 and a 5. So as long as those numbers roll, he can just steal it from black. And so each metro is 2 points each, right? So that's still in the yellow is still in the running, even though black already has it. Blue is in the running because he's at level 3. Green's in the running, so that's potentially 6 points for red. Another source of quick points is the longest road bonus, and looks like red isn't very close to that. Black isn't either. The black can make roads pretty easily with the 9 brick and 10 wood. Red can't. So I'm not going to really consider longest road for red. Although you always have to consider the chances of him getting road building, which would actually put him very close to that. So possible but unlikely for that. So that's 6 points for 6 different metros. He already has merchant right now, so that could easily be taken away. And then finally, his expansion possibilities. Well, again, since he has aqueducts, he can still expand, and he has a lot of open space around both of his cities. So getting at least 1 settlement, or even 2, are probably not difficult. So plus 6 points, plus 2 more from settlements. So he has a pretty good shot at winning, but let's see. So next we were looking at black. Black already has 2 points from the yellow metro. As for the other 2 metros, he should have a pretty good shot at blue. Actually no, red has a much better shot than black. Red already has 2 cities, covering a total value of 3 hexes, so we'll basically consider that not one of his win conditions. Oops, my turn. Almost forgot that. So he already has one of his win conditions, yellow, 2 points. He can't get blue, and at this point he definitely can't get green. And I mean, all he has is a city on a 10, which hasn't produced anything for him so far. So he's currently at 8 with already 2 points from one of his win conditions. Can he get longest road? Sure, so I'll give him another 2 points for that. And then he could easily take merchant. He already has 2 yellow cards. Odds are one of them is a merchant. So that's plus 5 for him. And how easily can he get those? Well, he's going to have to build 3 roads. That'll give him 2 points. And then after that, it's going to be a little harder. Always can count on plus 1 for the merchant, so that'll bring him up to 11. Still needs 2 points after that, so he has to get a city or settlement somehow. So I think at this point red can much easier make much more easily make an explosion. He could get a blue metro and a green metro all in one turn. That's 4 points right there. So at this point, I'm still favoring red a little bit over black, but these guys are very dangerous. And then as for me, who's purple, my win conditions are getting green metro before these guys. Oh look, red already got blue metro. Longest road is actually not too hard because I get a lot of wood and I'm already at 3 roads, so I just need to make 2 more. So that's 4 points, plus 1 more for a merchant, that's 5, so that'll bring me up to 11. And somehow I'm gonna have to get 2 more points after that, so those will have to come from Defender of Catan or getting another settlement. Getting another settlement should be pretty easy, but I don't think I'm gonna be winning this one at this rate, but I'm just gonna do my best to slow everyone down. And as I already predicted, red is starting to race ahead. Okay, so we fast forwarded a little bit, and I just want to emphasize, again, always keep on thinking about win conditions. So here, black just made a play where he traded a bunch of cards to get Aqueduct, and now he's in position to get the green metro just like the rest of us. On top of that, he still has his win condition of getting longest road, even though he only has 2 roads. He has pretty good income, and I'm still scared that's gonna happen. And so, because I'm always thinking about win conditions, I want to just cut off one of his. So I'm now gonna claim this longest road. I usually don't like getting points if I don't have to, but in this case, now someone has to build 3 roads instead of 2, and that's gonna be a lot harder. And plus, I'm still behind him in points, so I can't get hurt by cards that require someone to have more points than you. So let's see what I get over here. So here, red is also probably going to win Defender of Catan. That's another point for him, and so that's, I mean, since he has 2 level 3 knights, that's a big win condition for him. Unfortunately, actually, no, I could just target right here and hit all of them. I'm going to steal for red because he has a guaranteed point. And the other thing is, right now, I don't want him getting that point, so black does not have any active knights. I'm actually going to underactivate so that we just have 7 active knights versus a barbarian strength of 8. That prevents red from getting the point, and then black can lose the city. That's a win-win for me. I'll take it. Let's just hope barbarians roll. And there we go. Alright, so fast forward, we're now at the end of the game. Red took the 2 metros like I expected, and then black spread out. And he met his win condition by playing a road building, getting a settlement. Now he just played a city and taking merchant, and he got that longest road. So actually he got road building twice, and then that's just part of the luck in this game, you know. If you didn't get those road buildings and I got them, or even red got them, this would have been a completely different game. So you pick who you think is going to be the leader. You know their win conditions, and sometimes the progress cards will just shift the luck in everyone's favor, and that's why they're so important, because you don't know what they have, and they don't know what you have. So that was a rather lengthy discussion about how to figure out who the leader is. Now let's talk about why we should target the leader. And the main reason for this is because the game is exponential. And I can't stress that enough. So for example, in the base game, it might look something like this. So here's a graph of the number of points you have versus the number of turns. And in the base game, it's kind of very slow. Actually, it's probably like a flat line for most of it. And then you start getting some cities and settlements, and then moving up, and then finally you might hit 10 points. In Cities and Knights, it's a lot different. You can start low, but actually a lot of your production goes into your city improvements, and so these again are not reflected in your points. and so you generally stay pretty low throughout most of the game. But then once that aqueduct kicks in and all your progress cards are flowing in, then things start getting really fast. You jump from 4, and now you're suddenly at 7, and then suddenly you can make a 5-point play, and then boom, you're at 13. And so again, this game is exponential. You need to really stop these players that are gonna win the game before they reach this stage where you can't stop them over here. You have to stop them from getting their aqueduct when they're at level 2 green. You have to target them more when they start getting more of an income, things like that. And so your goal is actually to stall them so that when they start going like this, you keep them flat, and at some point they'll break through, but it gives enough time for you to catch up and just beat them to that 13-point mark like that. And it's very important to stall the leader because certain people have different conditions. So for example, maybe green here has a bunch of cities on forest but no other resources, and he's stuck the whole time until he gets aqueduct, and then suddenly all his numbers are all coordinated and he can get whatever he wants. He's able to get Metropolis quickly and then start expanding because he only has 3 numbers and is aqueducting everything else. And then green just explodes like that, so green has a longer start but activates the important things that he needs to win the game. Or similarly, someone might get a lot of resources and they can't do much until they get that port, and then once they have that port, everything just starts clicking together. And so that could also reflect this green person. And so say you're the 4th person in this game, your goal is to stop red from doing this. But then when red starts stalling and you notice green and blue starting to take off, you have to target them to slow them down. Like that. Just long enough for you to take the win before any of them. And now another reason why this game is exponential is that every single card matters. So for example, the 3 paper you need for Aqueduct represents only 3 cards. Or for example, getting that city on a forest that lets you get the paper for Aqueduct, that's 5 cards. So if someone were to rob you and take one of those 5 cards that you had ready to build that city or build that aqueduct, that slows you down for another turn. And that's huge because that's a whole nother 4 turns of income that you're not getting an aqueduct with or a city with. And so every single steal matters. And I would even advocate that if you can't rob from someone on a good number because they have it defended by night, if someone's definitely a leader, you should still target them, even if it's robbing them like at 11 hex or something like that. And also another major point is where people complain about solo blocking. There is really no such thing as solo blocking. If someone is the leader and has such a definite advantage over everyone else, it's pretty obvious. Like for example, maybe once red is shut down over here and green is about to shoot up, you gotta solo block them. There's no shame in solo blocking people if they're the leader. But say 2 people are really close, then yeah, obviously you should try to steal from them equally or put the robber on a hex that they both share if you can. Sometimes this might piss a lot of people off, like, oh, why are you robbing from me? And then at the end of the game, you're like, look, you robbed from me so much, now this other guy won. Well, yes, you should also be paying attention to the other people that you're also helping by stopping the leader. But the other major thing to consider in this game is that even though Catan is a strategy game, it's still heavily influenced by luck. It's very dependent on your dice rolls, and it's very dependent on the cards you get. So for example, if someone has their city on a 3, and a 3 keeps on rolling, but you had your city on 8, and the 8 doesn't roll all game, well, if you lose, it's not really your fault, it's just the luck of the game. And so that brings me to another diagram that I think is important, and it's this picture over here. This is also taken from Civilization, an older version, and this is just a histograph of the players' strength over time. So in this game, they all started pretty equal, but then the Koreans expanded more and more until they presumably won this game. But I want you to turn your head around and look at this a different way. I don't want you to look at this as score in the case of Civilization, but look at this as the odds of someone winning the game. So for example, at this point near the end of the game, let's just say that blue has a 60% chance of winning and green has a 40% chance of winning. So with all my advice that I've been saying, you should have been attacking blue preferentially, but if green wins, it's completely within the realm of possibility, you know? If you knew that green had a pretty decent second shot of winning, but you still had to stop blue, you still had to do what you gotta do. And this comes into play with a lot of late game arguments like, oh, why did you attack me? This guy has another chance of winning. And you had to be able to defend yourself and say, look, blue has the best win conditions right now. Green also has some pretty decent win conditions, but they're harder to get. And that's the argument you have to make. Sometimes you also, I mean, usually the game doesn't look like this where it's just 2 players in the lead. You might have some third player that has like a 10% shot. Like they just need to be able to take that metro, and that's their only way to win. And if they get that lucky merchant draw, they just happen to win. And again, if they won, it's partly because of luck, but that player did what they could to minimize everyone's odds of winning. And when you target the leader, you're stopping them from becoming like this blue guy over here. You want to keep them as narrow as possible and stop them from expanding exponentially. And by delaying the game, you're just increasing your odds of winning. And so this graph basically summarizes my mindset when thinking of every game of Cities and Knights, is that we all start at a certain probability of winning. It's not even like in Civilization. Some players might have a really good setup because they just placed better, or the board was, or the turn order was just generous to them. And I might target that player earlier on just to slow down the initial advantage that they already have. And every action you do to target other players affects everyone else. When you plow other players or when you race them to certain metropolises, that's affecting this graph so much. And the major point of this video I'm trying to make is you have to be able to defend who you need to attack and why you need to attack. And then bringing back to the very first point of this video, don't say, oh, he has more points than me. That's the worst excuse you could possibly give in Cities and Knights. So in summary, the general strategy should be stop the leader to prevent their exponential growth. Identify the leader as someone who has the best odds of winning, not the one with the most points. And remember that leader can change throughout the game, especially if you really beat down the initial leader. Take into consideration all the hidden value that the player has, which is typically reflected in many things that are not reflected by points. So for example, their progress card income, their ports, etc. So anyways, I hope this video is helpful. Good luck and have fun.